Pine Hollow Ranch used to be the most peaceful place in northern Idaho, until Jack Colburn started finding the horse stalls mysteriously unlatched every morning. No one knew why. But when cameras were installed, what they captured left the entire town in stunned silence. Willow, a jet-black Mustang mare, wasn't just unlocking her own gate, she was leading the entire herd out like a commander. And that wasn't even the most chilling part. Pine Hollow Ranch sat hidden deep in the snow-covered valleys of northern Idaho, where the pine trees whispered in the icy wind and frost clung to the barn roof all year round. It wasn't on any tourist map, nor did it boast signs or flashy advertisements. But to those who lived in the region, Pine Hollow was something else entirely. A place where wild Mustangs found refuge, where time slowed down, and where people lived closer to nature than anywhere else. Jack Colburn woke at 5:30 a.m., just like he did every morning. He stepped out of his small log cabin, the faint scent of last night's firewood still hanging in the air. The early winter chill hit him instantly, his breath turning to a pale mist. With a mug of hot coffee in one hand and the other tugging up the collar of his sweater, Jack walked silently down the narrow path leading to the stables. Fresh hoofprints pressed into the thin layer of snow, leading straight toward the open pasture beyond the fence line. He stopped in his tracks. Once again, the stall doors were wide open. The feed trough had been knocked over, oats scattered across the ground, a few bales of hay torn apart. 3 horses wandered freely, not the least bit alarmed. They grazed casually, eyes scanning their surroundings as if this was just another peaceful morning. But for Jack, this was the 6th time in 15 days. A former horse trainer for riding schools in Wyoming before returning home to tend the family ranch, Jack didn't believe in coincidences. He was meticulous, checking every latch, every lock, every loose plank before turning in each night. No wind was strong enough to undo 4 iron stall doors weighing nearly 100 pounds each. No raccoon, bear, or coyote had left a single track. He crouched beside the overturned trough, scooping up a handful of scattered oats. Then his gaze met the eyes of a quiet figure standing not far off by the fence, Willow. Willow, the jet-black Mustang mare with deep brown eyes that always held an uncanny stillness. Roy, Jack's father, had bought her from a wild horse holding facility in Nevada 3 years ago. Back then, she was a menace to anyone who got close. But at Pine Hollow, under Jack's quiet patience, she'd grown calm, independent, and always observant. Today, she stood among the herd, but she wasn't grazing. She was watching Jack, her eyes not innocent, not aggressive, just waiting, as if she already knew what he was going to ask. Jack slowly rose, shaking his head. This isn't right. He turned and walked toward the main house, a larger wooden brick home belonging to Roy and Marianne Colburn, about 100 meters from the stables. It was a white brick house with a green tin roof, a thin trail of smoke curling up from the chimney, and the faint hum of country music playing inside. Roy, now 72, was a retired firefighter. Tall and wiry, his hair silver like ash, but his eyes still sharp. He was pouring coffee into a metal cup when Jack's boots hit the porch. He looked up immediately. "Again?" he asked, his gravelly voice laced with concern. Jack nodded. 3 stalls open, same horses. Trough flipped, hay everywhere. No human prints, no animal signs, just like before. Marianne stepped out from the kitchen, wrapped in a soft blue cardigan. She had once been an elementary school teacher, now spending her days writing a blog about ranch life and tending the herb garden behind the house. "You think someone's trying to mess with the ranch?" she asked, arms crossed, voice low and clear. "I don't know," Jack replied, his eyes drifting to the window, where Willow still stood. "I just know something's going on, and we need to figure out what it is." Roy nodded. "Set up the cameras. We still have that old system, right?" Jack nodded again. "I can get it up and running by this afternoon. If someone or something is opening those stalls, we'll find out tonight." Marianne hesitated, then muttered, "You think maybe the horses are doing it?" Jack chuckled. "Mom, if horses can pick locks, I'll go ahead and retire." Roy smirked. "Don't laugh. I saw a horse open a latch with its teeth once, down at a ranch in Montana. Either way, if it's Willow, I want to see it with my own eyes." Jack turned to leave, his coffee already cold. He headed for the old equipment shed, where the outdated surveillance system still sat, collecting dust. The sky had turned gray, and wind howled through the dark pine trees. Questions swirled in his mind, but ahead of him, Willow's steady gaze remained locked on his every step. The mountain air was bitter cold, seeping through every crack of the old equipment shed where Jack had set up the surveillance monitor. Outside, snow drifted down like fine dust, blanketing the barn roof and settling gently on pine branches. All of Pine Hollow Ranch was still, the only light coming from the pale blue glow of a monochrome screen reflecting off Jack Colburn's tense face. He sat alone, clutching a now cold mug of coffee, eyes locked on the string of clips recorded the night before. One hand worked the ancient keyboard slowly, while the other rubbed his forehead, trying to untangle a knot that had formed deep in his thoughts. The footage played on. 10 p.m., nothing out of the ordinary. 11 p.m., just a few shifting shadows, the barn door creaking faintly in the wind. Then, at 3:11 a.m., the screen flickered, and Jack sat bolt upright. In stall number 4, Willow's stall, a dark silhouette stood under the faint moonlight. The horse wasn't still. She tilted her head, lowered her neck, and touched her muzzle to the iron latch. Once, twice, then again. With a soft click, the latch popped free, as if it had been opened by human hands. Jack held his breath. Willow stepped out of the stall, silent as a shadow. She paused at the next stall, lowered her head again. This time the latch was tougher, but she didn't give up. 2 minutes later, it opened. A chestnut-colored horse peeked out, let out a soft nicker, but froze when it met Willow's gaze. As if understanding some silent agreement, it quietly stepped into the open. One by one, over the next 15 minutes, Willow opened 3 more stalls, each time with precision and care. She didn't rush, didn't fumble. Every move was calm, deliberate, as if rehearsed. Jack didn't move. His eyes were fixed to the screen, unblinking. He rewound the footage, slowed it down frame by frame, replayed the sequence again and again to be sure he wasn't imagining things. No, this wasn't instinct, this was intention. Willow wasn't just opening doors, she was opening the right stalls in a specific order. She wasn't acting like a rebellious animal, she was leading. "Good Lord," Jack whispered, running his hands through his hair. "This can't be real." He kept watching. The horses led by Willow stepped silently into the pasture. No neighing, no kicking at gates. They moved as if they knew they had to stay quiet. At 4:10 a.m., all of them gathered near the fence line, staring up at the sky. Then slowly, they turned back, as if the night walk had come to its end. Willow was the last to return. She circled the barn, waited for the others to settle in, then walked into her stall and gently pulled the door shut with her muzzle. It didn't lock, of course, but it felt like a promise. I was never here. Jack backed away from the desk, his hands trembling. He stood, rushed to the door, the cold air slicing across his face. But he barely felt it. One question roared in his head. Why is she doing this? The next morning, Jack knocked on his parents' front door. Roy was hauling a feed bin for the chickens, and Mary Ann was watering her rosemary pots out on the porch. "Dad, Mom, come inside. There's something you both need to see." They gathered in the living room, where Jack set his old laptop on the table. He didn't say much, just hit play. The video rolled in slow motion. In grainy black and white, Willow appeared, lowering her neck, nudging the latch, and gently swinging the door open like a prison guard setting someone free. After each door, she paused, glancing around cautiously, as if checking for witnesses. Roy and Mary Ann sat in silence, their eyes fixed on the screen. When the clip ended with Willow pulling her own stall door shut, the room fell still. Roy leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. "That horse is smarter than half the crew I worked with in the fire department." Mary Ann stayed quiet for a long moment. Then softly she said, "She knows. Willow knows exactly what she's doing. But why?" The 3 of them exchanged glances. Outside, the morning sun peeked through the pine trees. A soft golden light broke through the mist, stretching across the horse fence. And there, right where she had started her operation the night before, stood Willow once again. Jack sat down and replayed the last segment of the video, where Willow paused at the feed shed. With one firm nudge, she opened the door. She didn't eat. Instead, she used her muzzle to push a small bag of oats out onto the ground. Then, with a gentle tap of her front hoof, she broke the bag. One horse approached, then another. Mary Ann's voice cracked. "She's sharing it with the herd." Jack nodded. This isn't just intelligence. She's organizing. Roy nodded quietly. She was never just an ordinary horse. Never. That evening, Jack reinstalled the cameras, but this time he added two more, one facing the feed shed and another pointed toward the outer fence line. He also checked the locks, carefully. There were no signs of tampering, no signs of break-in. Every indication pointed to the same conclusion. Only someone from the inside could have opened those stalls. Willow wasn't a phenomenon. She was a question, and the answer to everything that had gone wrong on the ranch. Jack no longer had any doubts. She was leading them. The only question left was, why? 2 days later, Pine Hollow Ranch was no longer the quiet stretch of land it had always been. It all started with a 1-minute-and-15-second clip Marianne Colburn edited from the surveillance footage, a moonlit scene of Willow unlocking the stall gate, then calmly leading each horse out like a seasoned trail boss. She added a simple caption, "This Mustang knows how to open latches, and she's doing it for a reason." Then she posted it to the local Facebook group, Idaho Ranchers Weekly, just meant to share with a few old friends in the wild horse training community. She didn't expect it to reach 40,000 shares by the next day. By day 3, views crossed 1 million. A popular TikTok account called Frontier Heart clipped the footage of Willow opening the gate and overlaid it with the iconic whistle theme from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The caption read, "She ain't just a horse, folks. She's a legend in boots." Within a week, Willow became a household name, the escape artist mare, the smartest runaway horse in the American West. Local news picked it up first. Then came a short feature on Idaho Public Television. Then a full write-up in the Spokesman Review, one of the Northwest's biggest newspapers. From a quiet soul of the herd, Willow became a sensation. On the 5th morning after the video went viral, Jack opened the front door and froze. 7 pickup trucks were lined up along the dirt road leading into Pine Hollow. Families had driven in from Spokane, Seattle, even Boise. Some carried cameras, some had binoculars. Some were dressed like they were headed to a weekend rodeo. A middle-aged man, in a leather jacket with a bulky Canon camera hanging from his neck, stepped forward and offered his hand. "Hey there, I'm Wade. From Idaho Equine Life. Heard you're the guy who trained Willow?" Jack squinted, already weary. "No, Willow trained herself. I'm just the guy trying to understand her." The man laughed heartily. "That's a great line. Mind if I get a few shots by the fence?" Jack nodded slightly and turned back toward the barn. The crowd buzzed with excitement, but inside him was nothing but unease. Willow, as usual, was standing in her familiar corner of the pasture. Her head was held high, ears forward, watching the movement beyond the fence. Her eyes weren't nervous or afraid. They were calculating. Jack approached quietly and whispered, "They're here for you. You know that?" Willow snorted softly, then lowered her head to graze. But what she did next froze Jack in place. She lifted her head, reached her muzzle toward the latch, and clicked it open. She didn't step out. She simply stood there, stall door swinging wide, while the crowd beyond the fence broke into applause and laughter like they'd just witnessed a magic trick. Roy and Marianne could hardly believe what their ranch had turned into. Every day people came, from horse lovers to elementary school kids to bloggers specializing in emotional animal stories. Everyone wanted to see Willow in action. One morning, while Marianne was jotting notes in her farm journal, there was a soft knock at the back door. A small red-haired girl stood outside, her hands clutching the hem of her dress. "My mom said I could come," the girl whispered. "I just want to see Willow." Marianne knelt beside her. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Ellie." "Ellie Brooks." She was a neighbor girl who lived 2 miles away, survivor of a car accident 4 months earlier. The trauma had left her silent ever since, diagnosed with emotional dissociation. Her mother, a nurse, brought her to Pine Hollow after watching Willow's video, hoping for something, anything, to break through. Ellie walked slowly toward the fence. Willow was grazing, but lifted her head at the sound of footsteps. Their eyes met, neither moved. Then, slowly, Willow stepped forward. Deliberate, calm. Ellie reached out, no hesitation, no fear, and placed her small hand on the side of Willow's face. And then it happened. Marianne gasped through tears. Ellie laughed. Her first laugh in 4 months. Jack had watched from a few feet away. The moment hit him like a bolt. From that point on, he knew Willow didn't just belong to Pine Hollow anymore. She had already touched the hearts of people far beyond the fence, people still waiting for a miracle. The next day, a new visitor arrived. Tall, flannel shirt, black-rimmed glasses, carrying a small camera and notebook. He introduced himself. "Max Harper, I write for the Mountain Ledger. Heard there's a Mustang here who's outsmarting half of Idaho." Jack offered a weary smile. "I don't know if she's the smartest around, but I do know she doesn't like being called a show." Max paused, then smiled back. "Good. I didn't come to sensationalize. I came to understand her." That line caught Jack's attention. Max stayed at the ranch nearly a week. He filmed, interviewed, watched Willow with quiet respect. He didn't push. He didn't crowd. He helped Roy muck hay. He kicked a ball around with Ellie. Slowly, Jack came to trust him. One quiet evening, Max asked, "Why do you think she's doing it, opening the stalls every night?" Jack didn't answer right away. After a long pause, he said, "Maybe she thinks her friends deserve freedom, or maybe she knows the world out there is worth sharing." But just as things seemed to be settling into something good, Jack started noticing something he couldn't ignore. Certain faces in the crowd had started to repeat. Men who didn't smile, men who didn't clap or take pictures, men who stood close to the Mustang's fence line, hands tucked into jacket pockets, eyes scanning with precision. One day, Jack overheard one of them ask another visitor, "That black one, what stall does she sleep in?" Jack stood nearby. A cold shiver crept down his spine. The piece of Pine Hollow was starting to fracture. Willow still opened her stall in the mornings. But that night, Jack added a chain to the lock, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't sleep. He stayed in the old monitor room, eyes locked on the screens, because he knew now, fame wasn't a gift, it was kindling. The early December wind carried a deeper chill than usual, slicing through the cracks in the old barn walls like needles against the skin. On the snowy hills of Pine Hollow Ranch, the sun, morning or evening, was nothing more than a thin scarf across the dull gray sky. Everything felt quiet, too quiet, and to Jack Colburn, that stillness only amplified the sense that something was. For the past week, he'd spent more time watching than working. Not because the horses needed less attention, but because the growing number of strangers made it impossible to let his guard down. Since Willow had become a media darling, visitors came not just for admiration or curiosity. Some brought a different kind of interest in their eyes. One afternoon, while Jack was packing hay into the stalls, a low voice startled him from behind. "Excuse me, mind if I ask you a few things about that horse?" A bearded man in a worn leather jacket stood just outside the fence. He wasn't alone. With him were two others, one with a buzz cut and gray hoodie, the other a dark-skinned man who looked like a long-haul trucker. Jack turned slowly, his voice calm but alert. "Which horse?" "The black one." "Willow," said the guy in the hoodie. "Heard she used to be wild out in Nevada?" Jack nodded once. "Yeah, she's part of this ranch now." The man in the hoodie glanced toward the barn, his eyes sharp with calculation. "Rumor is she opens her own stall? And others too? You sure it ain't some trick?" Jack gripped the edge of the stall door a little tighter, his gaze never leaving the trio. "I don't put on shows here. Whatever Willow's doing, she wasn't taught, and we sure as hell don't have an explanation." The bearded man gave a crooked smile and stepped closer. "I'm just saying, there are folks real interested in horses like that. Real interested." "Well then," Jack said firmly, "I'd suggest those folks direct their interest somewhere else." He turned and walked into the barn without another word. After they left, Jack checked every camera around the barn. The system was old, but he had added a special wide-angle lens pointing directly at Willow's stall and the main gate. That night, he didn't sleep. He stayed inside the monitoring shed, eyes glued to the grainy screens, watching every flicker and shadow. But nothing happened. No one returned. Willow slept peacefully in her stall, despite the added layer of thick steel chain Jack had wrapped around her gate. 3 days later, Max Harper returned. He stepped out of his black SUV with his camera bag and notebook in hand. "I just got back from Spokane," Max said, pulling a small packet of printed images from his coat. "There's a ranch out there, lost 3 Mustangs last week. No signs, no noise. Only thing they caught on camera was a black truck with the plates covered. Cops think it's a horse theft ring smuggling them into Canada." Jack took the pages, flipping through the blurry stills. One of them showed a black truck, hauntingly similar to the one he'd seen near the Bonners Ferry gas station weeks ago. Max leaned in and dropped his voice. I have a gut feeling. The guys who asked you about Willow, they weren't just curious. Jack nodded slowly. I thought the same. They didn't talk like horse people. They talked like men planning something. By the seventh night, Jack made a decision. He would not sleep. Roy and Marianne didn't argue, but their worry was obvious. Marianne brewed a full pot of coffee and set it next to the monitors. Roy placed an old shotgun on the shelf by the door. Not to use, he said, just to show him we ain't playing around. Jack gave a tired smile, but inside, he felt anything but easy. The sense of dread had settled into his chest like a storm cloud. From 11 p.m. to 2 a.m., nothing moved, not a sound. But at 3:12 a.m., Jack's eyelids grew heavy. The screen blurred. He blinked hard, chugged coffee, but his body betrayed him. Slowly, his head dropped to the desk, and he drifted off. A loud, sharp whinny cut through the silence. Jack jolted awake. The monitors were black, no signal. Heart pounding, he leapt from the chair, burst out of the shed into the freezing air, and sprinted across the frost-covered yard. In the distance, the barn loomed, and Willow's stall door was wide open. "Willow!" Jack shouted, racing forward. Two more stalls, number 7 and 8, were empty. Sable and Dusty were gone too. The padlocks had been cut, the iron latches bent. Hoofprints were pressed into the soft earth, leading toward the tree line at the back of the ranch. Roy and Marianne came running, breathless. Marianne nearly collapsed when she saw the empty stall. "No," she whispered, tears falling. "No, this can't be happening." Jack clenched his fists, eyes blazing. "I fell asleep. I let them take her." Ellie, red-haired and barefoot, ran toward them, her mother trailing behind, shouting for her to stop. The girl stood frozen, staring at the open stall. Her lips trembled. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stepped forward, placed a small hand on the cold wood of the gate, and whispered, "Willow." That morning, Jack and Max dug through the camera backups. One hard drive had been cut off. The thieves knew exactly where to disable the signal. But in one far corner of the property, a side camera had caught a few seconds. A black truck, headlights sweeping across the trees. The license plate was covered with silver duct tape, but a few characters were still visible. Max snapped a photo and zoomed in. J9Y, probably Montana plates. I'll send it to the local sheriffs. Marianne stood behind them, her knuckles white around an old handkerchief. We have to bring them back, no matter what. Jack nodded, his voice tight. I won't let them take her without paying for it. Because this time, he wasn't just protecting a horse, he was protecting a symbol. The Idaho sky the next morning was the color of dull lead, stretched endlessly above a land locked in silence. Though snow hadn't fallen again, the ground had frozen into a brittle crust beneath each step. Pine Hollow Ranch was wrapped in a kind of tension that seeped into the walls. No one laughed. No one raised their voice. The only sounds were creaking boards, the jingle of bridle bells on the remaining horses, and the quiet, steady sighs of people who'd lost something they loved like family. Roy sat at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee steaming in his hand, though he hadn't taken a single sip. His gaze drifted out the window, where the empty stall still bore the imprints of Willow's hooves. Marianne closed her notebook and stood. We can't just sit here. The police will take days to process paperwork. By the time they move, Willow and the others could be halfway out of the state. Max Harper, the reporter who hadn't left the ranch since the theft, set his laptop on the table. I sent the partial license plate and footage to some contacts in the horse community and news circles. Just got word from a guy in Bonner County. He saw a truck matching that description heading west, toward the Oregon line. Jack stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. Oregon? There's an abandoned horse stable just outside the town of Ontario, Max continued. Right on the state border. Used to be flagged for suspected illegal animal trading. Local authorities never had enough manpower to shut it down. Roy nodded slowly. I've heard of it. Red Creek Stable. Shut down in 2017. Someone leased it a few months ago. No local riders use that area. Only folks who want to stay unseen go out there. Jack's hands balled into fists. Then that's where we're going. Marianne placed a hand on his shoulder. What about the police? Call them. But we're not waiting. Jack said firmly. Willow could be locked up, starving, or being hauled across the border tonight. I'm not sitting still. By 3 p.m., Jack's gray Chevy Silverado was crunching over snow-covered back roads heading west. Max followed in his SUV, while Roy sat in the passenger seat with a map and a pair of old binoculars resting in his lap. No one said much. This wasn't like any supply run or rescue trip they'd made before. This was a recovery mission, and for Jack, it was his first time stepping into the thin line where justice had no badge, and only conviction kept you steady. After nearly 4 hours navigating icy mountain curves and pine-lined roads, they turned down a narrow dirt path, scattered with mud and rock. A decaying wooden sign hung crooked at the entrance. Red Creek Stable, the paint barely visible beneath years of wear. Jack killed the engine and set the brake. Max parked behind them, pulling a compact camera from his coat. All three men stepped into the bitter wind. Before them stretched an old ranch, rusted metal stalls, a tin-roofed shed leaning sideways, and a black truck parked behind the barn. The air hung heavy, thick with menace. "I see someone behind the truck," Max whispered, pointing through the sparse pines. "And 2 more by the stall doors," Roy added. "They're not ranchers, and they're not tending horses." Jack nodded, eyes locked on the barn. "I'll go first. You two follow, hang back. If I say turn around, you drive." Roy gave a wry smile. "You always were the stubborn one." Jack stepped out from the trees and walked directly toward the barn. One of the 3 men, shaved head, camo jacket, looked up and frowned. "You lost?" he barked, his hand resting casually on his hip, too close to where a holster might sit. Jack stayed calm. "I'm looking for my horses. 3 Mustangs stolen last night from Pine Hollow Ranch. One of them's black, dark brown eyes, a scar on her front leg. Her name's Willow." The man narrowed his eyes. "Don't know what you're talking about." Jack took another step. "I saw your truck on my camera. Plate, headlight pattern, scratch on the bumper. It's a match." The man's gaze flicked to a muscle-bound guy in dark shades standing nearby. They exchanged a quiet word. Then, from the far end of the barn came a sound, faint but unmistakable. A whinny. Jack froze. That voice, low and gravelly with strength, he'd heard it every morning outside his cabin. "Willow, Willow," he shouted, sprinting toward the stalls. 2 of the men moved to block him. But from behind, Roy stepped forward, holding a folder with police documents and still frames from the surveillance video. "Cops are already on their way," he said loudly. "You can cooperate or get arrested." None of the men made a move. Jack reached the stall door, tied shut with wire and fraying rope. He tore through it with bare hands, prying it open. Inside, Willow stood still. Her coat was dusted with dirt and dry snow, but her eyes lit up the moment she saw Jack. He stepped inside slowly, placed a hand gently on her neck. "I'm here, girl. I'm sorry I let them take you." She pressed her forehead into his shoulder. No noise, no panic, just trust. Jack untied her legs and let her out. Behind them, Sable and Dusty waited in the next stall, shaking but unharmed. Max filmed everything. In the SUV nearby, Ellie watched from the window, her small hand clutching a photo of Willow tight to her chest. As Jack opened the trailer gate, Willow stepped up, then paused, looking back at the barn, then at Jack. She seemed to say, "Let's go home." He nodded, "Let's go home." Police arrived shortly after. 3 men were arrested, one with a previous record for illegal horse trading. The truck was impounded. Roy handed over the evidence needed to press charges. As they drove east again, snow began to fall, light like feathers. It settled gently on Willow's back, clinging like white petals to her black coat. The trailer rolled on, cutting through the pine forest. Behind them, the hoofprints would fade in the snow, but in Jack's memory, they were carved forever. The old trailer rumbled along the winding switchbacks of the Bitterroot Mountains, leaving behind faint tire marks in the soft spring snow. The eastern sky glowed with a pale orange hue, daybreak creeping in. Inside the trailer, Willow stood steady, her gaze fixed through the wire mesh window at the land rolling past. Every bump in the road, she shifted slightly, ears pricked forward, listening for the sounds of home. Beside Jack in the cab, Ellie sat silently, clutching a worn photograph of her and Willow, its edges curled from being held too many times. She didn't say much, but her eyes never left the shadow of the black mare behind the glass. Jack glanced over. "You okay, kiddo?" Ellie nodded, then after a pause whispered, "I knew. Willow wouldn't leave me." Jack smiled, tired but warm. She knew you wouldn't stop waiting either. As the trailer turned onto the dirt road leading back into Pine Hollow Ranch, the valley was already awake. Neighbors, who'd heard the news the night before, had gathered near the fence line at dawn, holding thermoses of hot coffee, plates of homemade biscuits, and hand-painted signs. "Welcome home, Willow, Idaho's hero horse. We believe in miracles." Roy parked the truck near the gate. The wooden doors creaked open to reveal a freshly shoveled paddock, cleared of snow by neighbors long before sunrise. Mary Ann stood at the fence, wrapped in a wool shawl, tears brimming as Willow stepped down from the trailer. No one clapped, no one cheered, just silence, reverent and still, like when a loved one returns from war. Willow walked slowly, each step firm and sure. There was no panic, no hesitation, just the quiet knowing of a creature that understood she'd come back to where she belonged. Mary Ann stepped forward and placed a hand on her neck. "Welcome home, brave girl." Willow leaned into her shoulder, and for the first time in days, Mary Ann let herself cry, out loud. The story of the rescue spread fast, not just by word of mouth. Local news aired it, equestrian forums reposted it, and Max Harper's feature piece broke through national lines. He titled the article, "The Guardian of the Grasslands," a nearly 3,000-word story in the Mountain Ledger, accompanied by the footage of Willow letting out a soft whinny as Jack appeared outside the barn. The final line of Max's piece read, "Not everyone believes that horses can think, plan, or protect. But after meeting Willow, I don't doubt it. Because sometimes intelligence doesn't speak. It acts in silence, with persistence, and with love." The story was shared tens of thousands of times. PBS reached out to Pine Hollow about a potential documentary, but this time Roy stepped in. "She's not for display," he said. "She needs rest." Instead, Mary Ann told the story in her own words. She wrote from the heart of a mother who had stayed awake through endless nights, fearing her horse might never come home. Her essay was published on National Equine Watch, one of the largest wild horse advocacy platforms in the country. Within the first week, it was translated into 4 languages and reposted by wildlife protection networks across the globe. Willow no longer performed any tricks. She still strolled quietly across the paddock each morning, lowering her head toward Ellie, who sat reading by the fence. But she never again touched the latch. Jack kept the locks in place. But deep down, he knew. Willow understood. The world wasn't as safe as it used to be. And sometimes, freedom required boundaries to protect it. Pine Hollow changed. Visitor limits were enforced. Cameras and random filming were no longer allowed. The security system was upgraded. Electronic locks, motion sensors, night vision cameras. But the biggest change was philosophical. The ranch partnered with the Bureau of Land Management and Wild Horse Rescues to offer educational programs on Mustang preservation. That spring, Ellie, now 12, became the unofficial voice of Willow's story. She led small groups of schoolchildren around the ranch, telling them the tale not like a tour guide, but like a friend. She wasn't just a horse, Ellie said one afternoon to a wide-eyed group. She was a friend. And real friends always find their way back. Max later used that quote as the title for his second article. A few days later, PBS called again, this time to officially request a documentary titled Willow, Spirit of the Wild. Jack declined an interview, but he allowed them to film, from a respectful distance, so long as they never interrupted Willow's piece. One late April afternoon, Jack stood beside the paddock, watching Willow graze beneath the willow tree. Max walked up quietly, camera in hand. After a long silence, Max asked, "Why do you think she did it? Open the stalls, share food, lead the others?" Jack's eyes remained on the field, his voice soft. Because she never forgot where she came from. She didn't turn her back on the past, even when she was safe. She knew, if she got to live, the others deserved to too. So she acted. Max nodded. A philosopher in horse form. Jack gave a quiet smile. No, a warrior. That night, Mary Ann wrote in her journal as she always did. One line stood out. Willow didn't try to open the gate today, but she nudged the latch with her muzzle, just once, then turned away. Maybe she was just reminding us, freedom isn't given, it's guarded. Above the ranch, the stars blinked quietly. And beneath their soft glow on a grassy knoll above the barn, Willow stood tall, her shadow long across the moonlit field. No chains, no cages, only a soul, once hunted, once bound, now the living symbol of something far greater, hope. The May wind rolled in from the north, rich with the scent of pine, fresh grass, and the soft damp of summer forming over Idaho's high plains. Pine Hollow Ranch had taken on its spring colors. Lush green hills blanketed with wildflowers in violet, gold, and white, stretching across the valley like a woven quilt. From the barns came familiar sounds, hooves striking soft dirt, stall doors creaking in the breeze, and children's laughter floating in from the south pasture. Willow stood beneath the old oak by the fence line, her favorite morning spot. Next to her sat Ellie, now 12, hair neatly tied back, a small journal resting in her lap as she scribbled something down. She wasn't the shy, withdrawn child from years ago. She had grown into something more, a living reflection of the strength Willow had passed on. 5 years had passed since that fateful night, when Willow had been stolen and then rescued from a place so dark it nearly swallowed her whole. Since then, Pine Hollow had changed, not in size or shape, but in purpose, quietly, steadily, with conviction. The ranch was no longer a tourist stop. Instead, it had become a small educational center, the Willow Foundation for Wild Equine Education, a nonprofit that taught children and teens about wild horse conservation, environmental stewardship, and empathy for all living creatures. Every spring, they hosted the program A Week with the Wild Ones, where students from all over Idaho, Montana, and beyond came to live on the ranch. They learned how to care for wild horses, not as tools or trophies, but as sentient beings with thought, memory, and heart. Ellie was the lead instructor. She didn't enjoy cameras or stages, but with children, she became something magical. Her storytelling was honest, vivid, and full of wonder. When she spoke of Willow, her eyes glowed, not with pride, but with a quiet reverence for a bond that had changed her forever. One early summer evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines, Jack Colburn sat on the front porch in his favorite wooden chair, an old leather-bound journal resting in his lap. Before him stretched the golden pasture, dotted with grazing horses under the amber light. Willow wasn't as quick as she once was, but every afternoon she still made her rounds, slow steps, head high, ears alert like she was scanning the wind for news. And whenever she reached the fence, if Ellie was nearby, she always dipped her head in greeting. Jack flipped to a page in his journal from a few weeks back. It read, "Willow still tests the latch every week. She knows it won't open, but maybe she just wants to remind me, the free ones still need to be heard." He smiled, not the smile of a rancher, but of a man who had spent years being taught by one of the wisest teachers he'd ever known, a wild mare who showed him that love and freedom didn't need explanations, only understanding. Willow passed away on a quiet August morning. There were no signs, no struggle, just a strong wind during the night, and in the morning she didn't come out of her stall. Jack found her first. The door was ajar. She was lying on her side, eyes closed, no pain in her body, only stillness, like sleep. Ellie arrived moments later. She didn't cry. She knelt beside her, placed a hand on her neck, and whispered something no one else could hear. Marianne wrote in her journal, "Willow left this world the way she lived in it, quiet, strong, and unafraid. But after she was gone, everything felt a little emptier. The wind didn't whistle the same, the hills lost their hum, and the morning whinnies missed one note. She was buried beneath the old oak tree, the one she stood by every morning. A carved stone marked the spot, Willow, the silent pathfinder. She remembered freedom, so she shared it. There was no media, no banners, no eulogies, just the Colburns, Ellie, a few kids who had spent summers learning from her, and a handful of horses standing in the distance, silent and still." Years later, Willow's story continued to be told every spring. Children who came to the ranch all heard the legend from Ellie, now a licensed veterinarian specializing in wild equine rehabilitation. She kept a single photo framed on her desk, the first one ever taken of her and Willow, faded and curled at the corners. Max Harper, now a senior editor at a Western magazine, still mentioned Willow often. When asked once about the most unforgettable story of his career, he didn't hesitate. Willow, a creature who proved that you don't need a voice to change a heart. Jack, now gray at the temples, still lived on the ranch. Every morning he made his rounds to the barn, checking each latch and hoofprint. In his daily journal he always wrote, "Willow's stall, secure. No attempts to open." He knew there would never be another quite like her. But he also believed, if ever there was another, brave enough to try, he'd be the first to recognize it. Pine Hollow Ranch hadn't grown larger. It still sat tucked between pine forests and snowy ridgelines, under skies that drifted soft and slow. But for those who'd once stepped foot there, it meant something more. It was the place where a horse, wild, wise, and unbreakable, taught the world that freedom isn't just about leaving the gate. It's about choosing to stand for those who haven't yet found the strength to walk through it. Willow, that name, isn't just a memory. It's a reminder that within every creature lives a soul capable of love. And within every human heart, if we learn to listen, there is always a Winnie that never fades. If you believe that a free spirit can change an entire world, drop a 1 below. If you've ever witnessed a bond between humans and animals that spoke louder than words, comment 0. And if Willow's journey stirred something deep in your heart, subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next story, where intelligence, loyalty, and life itself are told through the eyes of creatures we once thought were just meant to run wild.